Thank you very much for having me here. So I just wanted to start the day by providing a bit of context. And just set the scene a little bit. So I don't imagine that a lot of what I say will be particularly new to most people, but when we spend time playing with the technology,
it's just frozen, everyone. It's a good start.
That's right. So I just wanted to take the time to say to everyone, we quite often get caught up in our small pressing research questions, looking at potentially a small part of the state. But the purpose of today is to look a little bit broader. So I just wanted to give a short presentation and give us the opportunity to take a step back from our own issues, look at the common threads and connections, it's time for us to appreciate the similarities and the differences that we'll weave through today's presentations. So I'm going to start off with setting the scene is always a little bit sort of fact and figure-ish. I wanted to talk a little bit about bird species distribution in WA, just to give us a bit of background. So here I just have a map of WA. We have about 50% of our bird species, of Australian bird species, are found in WA. Depending on how you classify your taxonomy, that sort of sits at around 550 species. We have a significant proportion of migratory waders, but we have in the realm of about 380 resident breeding species. If we were to split those up and look at the numbers that you find in different parts of the state, here I've just got them split up by IBRA region, so the darker the area, the higher the concentration of species. We see a couple of things starting to come out. We see that we get a concentration of species along the coastlines, and that's driven by differences in habitat. Coasts include not just terrestrial vegetation, but also coastlines and islands. So that's where a lot of our migratory birds and seabirds hang out. But also when we look at species distribution in WA, we have another couple of pockets of endemism. So our southwest is quite well known for its endemic bird species, but also we have pockets of endemism in the Kimberley as well. So we have tropical species that we either have separate subspecies for, or that we find representatives that we find just across the top of WA and into Northern Territory. The story of bird conservation status of birds in WA is a mixed one. When you look at the number of species in Australia that have gone extinct since the European arrival, there are 24 species or subspecies. In Western Australia, we had two subspecies represented. There was a Western rufous bristlebird that we've lost, and also a Western Lewin's rail. There's a bit of controversy around occasional sightings of Lewin's rail, but we'll just leave it as that. But we've clawed back on the board a little bit because there's also been rediscovery. So in the early 1960s, we'd realised that we hadn't lost the noisy scrubbird. It was rediscovered in the south coast. And in the last 10-15 years, the fleeting glimpses of night parrots were confirmed earlier last year with a photograph, this one here, taken by Bruce Greatwich in central Western Australia, and that's been followed up by a flurry of recorded calls, which is really exciting. However, despite that being said, despite there being rediscovery, we do have birds that are on the brink. There was a paper that came out earlier this year that was looking at classifying bird and mammal species by their likelihood to go extinct within the next 20 years. Of those 20 avian candidates to go extinct in the next 20 years, Western Australia has 3. Starts off with the Western ground parrot. That's given a 75% chance of going extinct within the next 20 years. Also the Hoopnebrolus painted button quail at 71%, and then Western bristlebird at 16%. So those are quite sobering facts. The painted button quail and Western bristlebird are both focuses of the BirdLife's Preventing Extinctions program, and there'll be a little bit of discussion about that later on. Now, I had this map up earlier on looking at species distribution in WA, but having just spoken about threatened species, I wanted to switch this map up and plot it instead for where our threatened species occur in the state. So our threatened and listed species, there are 55 species or subspecies that are considered that are listed under state legislation. And we see that by plotting where those species occur on the map, it's gone from this to this. So we see that some of our areas become quite paler and some of them become a lot darker. It's important to note that there is no IBRA region in the state that is without threatened species. Even though most pale ones still contain at least 4 threatened or listed species. But we see a very high concentration of species in our southwest. That's not surprising. That's where the majority of our population lives. That's also where we have those endemic species and subspecies reside. We still see that our coasts are quite dark, and that's mostly relates to 2 things: 1, our migratory shorebirds, and 2, our endemic island birds that are found nowhere else. And when we start to look at threatening processes, I say this with the background that we in Western Australia have not had a State of the Environment report for the last 13 years, I think 2005 was the last one. But I think it would come to no surprise that the threats that face our birds have probably not changed in that time. And even when we're here looking at the conservation of birds across the state of WA, even though the specific species that are under threat and the habitats that may be threatened may differ, and the culprits that are causing those may differ, in general the broad themes are the same. We're talking about habitat loss and fragmentation, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about the effect of invasive species, both flora and fauna, and we're talking about inappropriate fire regimes, and we're talking about the way that those all interact together and cause bigger problems than they would by themselves. However, there are reasons for optimism, and one of those is why we're here. Well, that's one of the things we're here today for. We are really lucky when it comes to birds that we have a bit of a benefit of knowledge. We've lost 2 of those species, the Lewin's rail and the rufous bristlebird, so we know it's not too late. There are species that are threatened, but we know about those threats. The National Environmental Science Program's Threatened Species Recovery Hub has done some fantastic work looking at the effect of calculating the impact of monitoring on species. And when you look at biodiversity monitoring, the more you monitor, the better off you are. We're really lucky with birds. We have this fantastic platform of recreational birders who make use of their hobby to go out and collect data. So we have data from across the state that is able to tell us more about birds. So in some respects, we know a little bit, we know a little bit, and that provides us a bit of information to know what we don't know and gives us place to direct our future efforts. We also have other reasons for optimism. WA is a big state. A lot of our really intensive clearing has happened only in particular parts of it. We're a sparsely populated state, and that's given us a bit of breathing space, which is excellent. But there's also significant potential to get involved with protection. So when we look at protected landscapes in the state, about 10% of the state is state-managed conservation estate, but there's a significant proportion. There's an additional 13% that sits under Indigenous protected areas and potential ranger parks. So we are amazingly fortunate in WA that we still have this Indigenous knowledge that is strong throughout very many parts of the state, and that has the potential to deliver benefits when we're talking specifically about bird conservation. When you have Indigenous rangers managing land, then when they're managing for healthy country, our birds can do nothing but to benefit from that as well. The other reason that we have to be optimistic is that we have diverse stakeholders. A lot of you are here today. We have representatives from government. We have representatives from some of those Indigenous ranger groups. We have people from private conservation, from all sorts of community groups, and just interested members of the public. And that's that provides a fantastic wealth of knowledge. Through a wealth of knowledge, if we share it, we're better able to communicate what those threats are across the state. We're able to share the workload, and we're better able to deliver positive responses for our birds. So we take a tentative step forward today towards bird conservation. So I encourage you to think widely, think openly. On your booklets after each talk, after each speaker's abstract, there is space for questions. Write those down if you don't get the chance to ask them after the speaker has spoken. Save them for the breaks or save them for the forum session at the end. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.